So this is currently called 60 Minutes of Dadness. Yeah, we had Ryan Hawkinsmith from ESPN, and he named the show 60 Minutes of Dadness. So currently, that is what the show is called. We do this every Monday and Thursday, and we have exciting guests. And today, Marley Rivera, you are our very, very exciting guest.
Oh, that is so good. Thank you. Not very exciting. You're really scraping the bottom of the barrel here.
I think that couldn't be farther from the truth. I'm going to try and introduce you, and then you tell me anything I missed, okay? You were born in Puerto Rico. You have been blazing trails in both English and Spanish for years now. You're a Baseball Writers of America member. You've worked for ESPN since 2011 and been a national baseball writer, reporter, broadcaster, you name it, you do it, as well as a Yankee beat writer, and you worked for Advanced Media and Univision before that. So that's what I got. Tell us who you are, introduce yourself, and talk about your relationship with Scouts.
Well, number one, my name is Marley, and all these very nice things that Jesse just said are just not true. I started covering sports maybe like 20 years ago. I'm 45. I'm very proud of being 45, so I don't have a problem with saying my age. Covered baseball about, it's been like 20 years for me. It was a little bit of a late, incursion in a career. Like if you guys know Eric or Christy or like all the people that are really tight with baseball, especially the reporters and the writers, most of them it's what they wanted to do their entire lives. For me, it was a very different path. So I actually didn't start till I was in my mid-20s, starting this job, and then started, like you mentioned, with Univision, then went to MLB Advanced Media, so what is known now as MLB.com. And I wrote about soccer for quite some time, for 5 years, got to travel with the U.S. national team. That was pretty neat.
That is cool.
And I did that. And then from 15 years ago or so, I've been focused on baseball. And in terms of the Scouts, I don't think that I could do my job as well as I do it without them. So one of the things that I lack in as a reporter is my connection with Scouts. I have one, but I am nowhere near some of the best reporters at it, which obviously include Eric Boland, George King, Christy Acker. They really are masters at it. I have actually most of the Scouts that I know, I met them through any one of those three. So I actually don't know any on my own, but Eric is yelling, yes, you do.
Yeah.
But,
I love that you guys just, heckle each other. That's the best part of this.
So, yeah, but I just think that I admire them so much. And not only that, it's got to be so tough right now. If it's hard for us, just imagine really, like, at least we can still call. And
Right.
At least we can still come up with ideas somehow. I mean, the well is running dry, but just imagine being a scout. And being a scout in this moment, where it's just so difficult for them ahead of a draft, and so many, it's shameful what's happening with some teams under scouts. So that's, don't put me on a podium, like start yelling at what teams are doing it. I will.
So before we jump into the hard-hitting questions, like I said, we have some fun and inventive names for minor league teams, right? And there's a company that helps name them. The Pensacola Blue Wahoos, I don't know if you saw, they're putting their stadium on Airbnb. The Clearwater Threshers, the Jumbo Shrimp. So we let our guests name the show. So Eric Boland called it Boland's Bylines. I think you know him. Or like I said, Ryan just called it 60 Minutes of Dadness. So that had a good run. But what do you think we should call the show today?
It's too obvious. You know my name. It's a famous movie with a dead dog. Just say it. I'm sorry.
Marley and Me.
Spoiler alert.
And Eric had that choice and actually chose not to call it that. He left that for you. So
might as well just call it Marley and Me. There's just no so you'll appreciate my bad humor. There was when Marley and Me came out, I had a guy ask me out to go watch the movie, and he said, I just wanted to say, when we went to buy the tickets, he goes, I just wanted to say online to the ticket taker, I can't speak today, to the ticket taker, he goes, hi, Marley and I would like to watch Marley and Me.
Oh my gosh.
That was a big moment. Certainly not dating him anymore.
Yes. that would have worked well on 60 Minutes of Dadness. So let's jump in with the hardest hitting question first. And it's a two-part question. So Ichiro can pick you out of a crowd and greet you in perfect Spanish.
Yes,
You
you can.
facilitated an introduction between Vlad Guerrero Jr. and Drake,
Yes.
which is his hero. And you hang out with Tony Oliva, Rod Carew. So part one of this question, how freaking cool is it to be you?
You know what it is, and besides Vladdy, but everything revolves around being old. I am one of those people who is very comfortable with my age and very comfortable with the fact that I'm not cool. And I was never cool my entire life. Like, we all know these people. Like, I have 4 brothers, and they're so cool. Like, I'm just never cool. I was always a dork and a nerd. And then what that did for me is that in a weird way, I know some people that are nerds become very introverted. For me, it was the opposite. Basically made me a person who doesn't care. So I'll talk to anyone, anytime. And most of the time, I never speak to them about what it is that they do. Right. So I develop all these relationships. So, for example, not Tony Oliva and Rod Carew, because I obviously knew where they were from the beginning. But when we went to see Drake, and I know this is going to sound stupid, but I actually didn't know what Drake looked like. And I know this is really, really a bad thing. I like his music. I actually enjoy it, but I really didn't know. So when we're in front of him and I see all the security people, I'll be like, oh, so you're Drake? And then he's like, do you want to take a selfie with me? I was like, no, I'm good. He's the one who wants to meet. So it's kind of this laissez-faire kind of I don't care attitude that has gotten me these guys. And I also speak to everyone about everything but what they do. So I think that's sort of being the most positive thing. I feel like I can't talk. This is my first Instagram
You're
live.
doing great. Oh no, this is awesome already. So that's actually really good advice. And it's interesting, especially as you get into the media. I found that as you start to treat people in the game or wherever, just as
Like
your
people,
equal,
just
yeah, like
like
people,
people.
it just, yeah, the relationships change. So I guess part two is how did you get to this point and what was the journey
Oh,
like where you went from Univision and now you're Marley Rivera? How did that happen?
well, first of all, I really appreciate that you say that, but I am nowhere near the sports writer or the reporter that I could be. It's been quite a journey. I'm not going to put it mildly. It's very, very hard. There are still moments when I am not the chosen reporter or writer for ESPN for a particular story that I really, really want it to be mine. So it isn't, it's been very hard. But I think what I did early on, and you'll get this from a lot of baseball writers, women baseball writers, is that I stopped trying to be one of the guys, right? I grew up with 4 brothers. So I was always, a tomboy and like one of the guys all the time. And then when I started getting into sports writing, I behaved that way too. And I was around them all the time. And it was like, I wanted to be one of the guys. The moment I decided that that was enough and that I was going to use the assets that I had in order to succeed, then I started being successful. And it just, you try to reinvent the way that things are done. You have to find a way to cut through the noise. This business has a lot of noise and a lot of people who want to talk about it and a lot of opinions. So if you try to cut through the noise, being yourself, like that's all you have to do. You don't have to pretend. I don't have to pretend to know. I am right now a pitching expert and I will call myself a pitching expert. And I talked to Garrett Cole for 2 hours about pitching, so I think I deserve that.
Yeah.
But I was a moron about pitching 15 years ago. And what did I do? I educated myself and I made myself the best at what I could do. So I think that's sort of what's made me quote unquote successful. I am really one of those people who found what she was good at. The 3 things that I do really well in baseball. People like to tell me stuff and insert the curse word that should be there, but we're in 75, so people love telling me stuff. I'm one of those people that I'm in the supermarket and someone will come complain about how expensive the pears are. And I'm like, like people always tell me things that I don't want to know. I sit on a train, in half an hour, I'll know everyone's life. Like, it's just really, I have this thing. My mom says that I have a trusting face that people want to tell me things. So that's number 1. Number 2, I speak several languages, right? So I use that to my
Right.
advantage. And number 3, I'm a tall Hispanic woman and I stopped complaining about it. It was all about like trying to make yourself small and trying to make, be a part of the group and trying not to, I don't care. I'm loud, I'm tall, and that's just who I am. So it's okay. Once you embrace that, you do fine.
That's amazing. I kind of want to read this. Let's see. So we try to pepper in audience questions, but this is a statement. Latina
God.
women in her position. It's hard to read because it's a little white. Let's see. Marley is an inspiration for my 3 daughters and all other young ladies. As a former MLB pitcher, this is very cool. My girls love listening to ladies like her. Let's talk about that. Just being a role model, you know, and how do you get more Latino women in the game or women in the game in general?
I have such a conflicted feeling about that because I don't think I'm a role model. And the way I mean that is not because of my accomplishments or working hard and so on. I think that a lot of us are role models in that sense. It's because I am so flawed and I see myself as a very flawed person. So I really don't want your kids to follow me because I screw up all the time. I really just fail constantly, but I have embraced failure, right? So this is really something that I really enjoy. But the other side of that is that when I started in this business, there was no one who looked like me, right? Claire Smith had already retired. There's not a single, woman national writer that does what I do, and certainly that looks like me. And also there was no one in the game, no Latinas in the game who were, beat writers or anything like that. There's reporters for TV, and I'm not putting anyone down. It's an entirely different process, right?
Right.
Like, reporters for TV don't normally talk to scouts, and that is to their detriment. Really to their detriment.
Yeah.
But when you see, and now there's three of us. So we had a joke. I took a selfie in spring training and said it used to just be me having the Latina National Baseball Writers Dinner, and now I have the two Marias, Maria Cortado and Maria Torres, who cover the Angels and the Giants. So it is such a sense of pride for me to see them and them calling me an inspiration, which I find hilarious because it really is not like I didn't set out to do it that way, right? Like I didn't do this to blaze trails. I really didn't. I did it because I was good at it and I had something to contribute, right? Like that's really, I don't think that we should be in this game if you have nothing to contribute. I think that my voice matters and I think that I have something to contribute. So it's so lovely that people would say, oh my God, I want your daughters, my daughters to follow your lead. And I've had other people come up to me and say that. And what I would say to that is, just work hard, right? Like I'm not the only model. There's a lot of people out there. Men can be your role models. George King is one of mine, right? So it's like you have to do your best, but it is so incredibly, and I'm going on, Jesse, I'm sorry.
No,
This
it's
is
okay, please.
Maybe we should call it Marley and Marley. Apparently she doesn't let anyone else talk. Ask her, Colin.
We're here for you, not for me. So anything you have to say, keep going.
But to finish, the point was, it is so flattering to have people that come up to me. I had one of the oh God, I told you I can't talk today. One of the Francisco Romero, who's the play-by-play guy for the Astros at home. His daughter started like following baseball, and obviously his dad is a play-by-play guy, so it's not all about me, but she watched me every day. She learned how to score. She's like 9 years old, and she'll send me pictures and messages, and like, how does that not warm your heart?
Yeah.
How does that not feel? But the problem that we have right now is that we're in a dying business that has to change and reinvent themselves, and unfortunately all these women that blaze trails, like the Claire Smiths of the world, who is my mentor, and I know one of Christy Acker's too, is the fact that we're going back now. There isn't a progress for women. So you see a slight progress because you see them more in the clubhouse and you see this kind of stuff, but there's a little bit of a regression. So I hope that all those little girls out there, change that narrative soon.
So from what you were saying, you almost have like an athlete's mentality about failure and using it as a motivation. I don't know if you picked up on that, but just Aaron Rodgers was recently talking about how it's just that chip on your shoulder, right? How do you use that? And like, for instance, you recently wrote a piece where you talked to Chris Sale, and you got him to be so open and so honest to questions.
I told you, tell me stuff.
Yeah, well, like he answered questions about the suspension and firing of his manager, and just trusted you, right? And that doesn't happen with everybody. So how do you use that, and how do you get those results?
It can be hard, Jesse, because you have to balance things out, right? Like I have very close relationships with many players. So you kind of, especially just because of being old, right? That's the theme. Just been around for a while. So I know these guys, like I've known Javi Baez since he was 12 years old, Carlos Correa since he was 13, right? So you have these relationships with these guys that are really, really long relationships, but then you don't know how to use them. And one of the things where I fail at, I need to be better, but The second thing that I really fail at is that I don't use my contacts enough. And Eric is always like, just call so-and-so. And I hate it, but there is a positive in this. I am someone who actually, Chris Sale said this, and I will pat myself in the back, like just for a little, because I never do that. Chris Sale said at the end of our conversation, unprompted, he goes, I want to tell you something, Marley. And I go, yeah, what's up, Chris? And he goes, I want to thank you because you always take the time to say hello to me, to ask me about my kids. And it's not always about getting an interview. And I know it sounds like bull, and I know it sounds very Pollyanna, but I actually do that. I actually go to every player that I know. The first thing I do in spring training is introduce myself to every player that I don't know. So I'll just go, every player, not only the Hispanic ones, right? Every single player that I don't know. I'm Marley or for, ESPN, blah, blah, blah. And then the rest of the guys, the ones that I see all the time, I used what I was trying to tell you before, Jesse, about being yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm someone who cares about family, right? I'm Puerto Rican, so I grew up with family. It's all about family. So then I asked them about their family. I learned their kids' names. I learned their wives' names because being a woman, it can be a little bit threatening. And we've seen how things are in baseball and women. It can be difficult. Right. Some reporters have married athletes, so it gets a little tricky. But in the end, you want to make sure that that trust is built because it isn't about talking to them just the time that they blew the game, just talking to them the day that they gave up 7 home runs, or talking to them. It's about talking to them on a Wednesday afternoon in August when there's nothing to do. And they're just out there standing out. It's about taking that time in spring training to spend a lot of time on those fields that now, I mean, I hated every PFB that I ever had to watch in my entire life. I hated it. Now I dream of it. Like, give me some fat pitcher running towards first. Enjoy myself because we miss it so much. But digressing here, the point being that if you treat people like people, and if you actually, every time that you speak to them, it isn't because you need something, then eventually when you do, they will come out. I have known Chris Sale for a decade. This is the first time I've ever interviewed him.
Really?
First time. Not getting quotes post-game, that's different, right? Like, Jesse, right. I've thrown questions in a post-game scrum, right? Like all those. You have to write about the game, of course. But an interview, sit down once. Don't waste your time. Don't, if you don't really need them, don't waste their time and yours. But use the time to build a relationship. And that's sort of what I've done. And the reason why I was able to get, 22 out of 30 managers to return my calls or things like that is because I don't waste your time. I actually just ask you things when I really need them. And trust me, a lot of them haven't come through. So it's really a numbers game. You do that with 1,000 players and you're lucky if you get 10 that follow through.
Can you talk sort of about, it's obviously about relationships, right? But how do you know when to use that one bullet you've been saving, or like, what is it even about the profession where other people, it's a long season, right? So it's tiring. Why do you have that stamina and others don't?
I don't know. Maybe because a lot of people want to make themselves part of the news. So if you make yourself, let's say, I'm trying to come up with a random example. So let's say Carlos Correa, right? Just because this has nothing to do with the Astros. People don't yell at me. I've known it since I was a kid. So, I love that kid. So let's say Carlos Correa, had a terrible throw, right, in a game, and he blew it. And then, some fight happened, whatever. He was the star of the game in the negative manner, right? He was the, So do I say to myself, okay, is it the day for me to actually go sit down and ask him about this? Or is it better to just do a scrum where he's going to talk about the exact same thing to everybody else and I don't waste that bullet? So if you decide that you're not part of the story, because I'm so tired of media members who make themselves part of the story. It isn't about you. No one cares. No one wants to see me. They really don't. I appreciate you doing this Instagram live with me and whatever, but people want to hear from Chris Sale. People want to hear from Carlos Correa. So I'm only a via, right, a way for them to speak. It's not about me. So if you stop making it about yourself and actually realize that, you know what, this isn't about me right now, it's about this story, then you just don't. It actually becomes really easy. Now, sometimes I fail. Sometimes I have had relationships that have broken down because of the fact. And then you have another technique, which is, and this is, I'm sure he wouldn't mind. So, because a lot of you guys know him. So Eddie Rivera from the Red Sox, the assistant general manager, is a dear friend of mine, right? We've known each other for a really long time and whatever. But Eddie is never a source for me because we decided in the beginning that we're either friends or sources. So you can't be both, right? I think in this business, you really can't be both. You can be friendly, but you can't be a close friend and a source. It gets tricky, and that's it. And then I always talk to him, and it's always off the record, and he's never a source. So I think if you divide your relationships into the ones that can be sources, the ones that are just your friends that teach you about the business. I have a lot of those people that I love calling, and we discuss things, right? Like we learn about the business. Then you really don't make yourself the story, and like don't waste your time, and realize the magnitude of the moment, right? Maybe you should save that bullet for the playoffs. So
Right.
That's it. That was long, Jesse.
It was long, but man, you could teach a master class right now. We're gonna we're giving it out for free. I love it. So talk to me now. This is a format question. I've noticed more of late that conversations, like the back and forth, more so than you just said it, right? Making it about yourself. So instead of it being a column, I've seen a lot more in this Chris Sale piece, right? It was more of a conversation.
Q&A, yeah.
Talk to me about that, and stylistically, is that how journalism is changing? Is that what people want to see?
I don't know. Well, maybe it's just a bit of a cop-out because I'm not as good of a writer as so many other people are. But no, I'm kidding. I think that the reason why we do a lot of Q&As now, especially me, is to take advantage of the fact that people like to tell me stuff. So it is because what happens is that you can't condense all these topics in a story. You otherwise have to save everything that you talked about for different pieces throughout the year.
Right.
And now with the COVID situation, people want to know so many things about the athletes. So we're kind of focused on that. And basically, me and my editors, remember, this isn't my decision. I like to think that this is my decision. No, I have my main editor, the wonderful and incredible Christina Carl, shout out there. Christina, who is my editor, I discuss things with her and she tells me which one she believes would be a better way. And then she'll speak to her editors and her bosses, and then they figure it out and then they tell me back, right? Like I don't make that decision. But then, basically the point of the Q&A, and we did it with Chris Sale, we did it with, who's the recent one? Yari Molina. Yep. The reason why we do them that way is because you can get more information in just one story. And it isn't become, right? Like I'm working on a story right now, right? And let me make up one. So if I was talking to Gary Sanchez, right? Just a catcher for the Yankees. So if I was talking to Gary Sanchez, if I ask him about his favorite food and who was his favorite catcher growing up, and I ask him about the past balls and catching in New York City, those two things are very, very hard to put in one story.
Right. Now,
if I'm Christy Ackert, if I'm Tom Verducci, if I'm Eric Boland, then maybe I would be able to put Jeff Powell. Then maybe I'll be able to put all these different things, the great Ken Rosenthal, maybe I can put them all in the same story, but I'm not able to. I'm not someone who gets, so if it's very, very broad, I feel like the Q&A is the best medium for it. It isn't always the best medium, and you need a good talker, Jesse, because if you don't have interesting answers, screw that. Like it doesn't matter.
I think, and it's really interesting because you're right. People do want to know so much, and to connect those dots is very, very difficult. Yeah, like you can't connect rice and beans and plantanos and dropping, pass ball. It doesn't work.
It just doesn't. Sometimes you can fit in to things that are, especially if you're doing a profile, but we're not doing profile. And I'm so tired of stories that are 2,500 pages long. I can't do it. I get bored. I feel like, and I know Jeff would love this, but like Passan is one of my favorite writers, my colleagues. But half in the story, I'm like, Jeff, I'm done. You could have really just. This is a little too long.
Editing is important. Oh man, I love it.
Eddie Lou, okay.
Hi.
Yeah, there's one of my. She is the PR director for the acereros in Mexico. The best part is that Bartolo Colon may go there. So
then the stories will go there too.
So Eddie Lou was saying hello. So I just wanted to say hello in Mexico out there.
So you were born in Puerto Rico. How did baseball come into your life? I know you said you were covering soccer, but where did baseball come from in your life? And it wasn't something you always wanted to do. So how did you end up here?
It's weird. It isn't something I always wanted to do. That's certainly true. But it was always the sport I loved. If you're Puerto Rican, it's sort of what you grew up with. My first love is boxing, and a lot of people that know me know that. But as everyone knows, you don't know this, Jesse, because you're way too young. But as everyone knows, boxing has changed, right? So the boxing that I grew up with in my 20s, 20 years ago, in my teens, 30 years ago, that's the boxing that I loved and enjoyed. And I was obsessed with it. For me, going to Madison Square Garden to watch like a bout, it was like the greatest moment of my life. But baseball is ingrained in Hispanic people, particularly if you're from the Caribbean, right? So if you're from Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico, even Haiti, we are actually just, that's our sport. And we have this tradition, right? Especially because of Roberto Clemente and because of the great Puerto Ricans that have been in the game, that you always, Puerto Rico has this thing, which I have kind of falling off the wagon on, that it can be annoying, but it's also really endearing, which is if there is a Puerto Rican athlete, if you have a third of a cousin that married the second cousin of a Puerto Rican person, they'll adopt you. It's like, it's Puerto Rican, he's Puerto Rican, let's do it. So people are really obsessed with anyone who was born in Puerto Rico and practiced a particular sport. It didn't matter what sport it was, right? And baseball, when I was growing up, there were so many very, very, very talented baseball players. So that's how, and my dad is a massive baseball fan, probably the biggest one that I know. So I grew up with 4 boys and watching a lot of baseball and watching a lot of boxing. So even though I didn't know this was going to be my career, it almost, the writing was on the wall, right? Like I've been watching, baseball for 40 years, probably my entire life. I can recall, Benito Santiago popping up and throwing a ball to second, like just this passion that I had for this game, but I never knew that I could sort of make money at it. Let's use that very lightly. Let's say make
So what is that experience like from the fan perspective? We're hearing more about it. We see the let the kids play, all that stuff, and the Latin flair that the younger players now are bringing in. But what is that difference of the game in Latin America versus here for those people who haven't experienced it?
I'm laughing because I'm so tired. Okay, so Jesse, this is the one thing that all the people that are out there that may know me, which I know is not that many, that I talk no bull. I speak exactly what I think. I don't. Maybe that's why I've done well in this game. Maybe that's why so many people like me and hate me. It's like it's hot and cold. But the main thing is, I have been so annoyed at everyone, and I am so happy that ESPN has the KBO, but I am so freaking annoyed at people going, it's a bat flip, this is so exciting. I am so tired of this. It's the baseball that we grew up with in Latin America. It is the baseball that I know. It's the baseball where things matter, where people have a party, where it's an actual game. And like, that is the best part, when you remember that it's a game. It isn't, and let's be clear, it's a hard one, and only that top 1% can play it to the level that it should be. But it is still a game. There has to be in it. And I recently did an interview with Hyun-Jin Ryu, the pitcher now with the Blue Jays, as you guys know, who was with the Dodgers. And Ryu, one of the things that he said was, in baseball in America, people sit at the office. It's like sitting watching. And he said it that way. It's like business-like. For us in Korea, it's a party. That's how I grew up with. Like when Eric and I got the opportunity, the professional, the lower tier of baseball in Puerto Rico is called AA. It isn't AA baseball. It's an entirely different thing. We do not have minor leagues in Puerto Rico per se, but it is a professional baseball league, the top flight right under the Puerto Rican National League, right? The Roberto Clemente League. So it's called AA baseball, has nothing to do with AA. That's just the name, right? So you can get a 40-year-old playing there. So in AA baseball, Eric had the opportunity to go, and we went, and look at this, I'm going to do a little name drop. We went with Sandy Alomar, senior and junior.
Oh, that's cool.
And we went to the town of Salinas, which is where they're from. So we went to watch this game. The entire time, it's just like 1,000 people there in a small town ballpark. People are standing up. People are cheering. People are yelling if you strike out. And that's the baseball that I know. You bat flip when you're joyous. It isn't about disrespecting the pitcher. It isn't about that. I understand that that's what you think. It isn't. Stop making it about you. It's about joy. And the joy in the game. Sometimes I wonder if people really love baseball. You don't have to question that if you go to a game in the Dominican League, if you go to a game in Cuba, they play with this passion with 300 people in the stands. It is just really, that's the baseball that I know. That's the baseball that I love. And we haven't seen it in a long time. So hopefully this big lesson that we're getting now, hopefully we'll get it after that.
So I guess we're talking about these cultural differences. There are players now that come over, let's say 16 years old, right, from the Dominican academies, or they're signed out of wherever in Latin America, 16 years old. They're tasked with learning the culture, learning English, trying to assimilate.
Yes.
And it's a different game almost. So what is that experience like for them, and how hard is it to actually make it in the game?
A lot easier than it used to be, right? We did a really big project 2 years in 2017, 3 years ago at ESPN called the Baseball Experience, the 50-man interview. And we took 50 guys in the game or born in Latin America to speak about that experience. And we went, most of them were superstars, right? We wanted to see that journey, right? We interviewed some young players and everything, but we needed a journey. So you needed to have players who were in the game. And some of the most outspoken players were Adrian Beltre and Nelson Cruz and these guys. And Adrian Beltre, one of the most amazing things was that he told me that he would go hungry sometimes because he came to the United States at 16, and the only thing he could afford was McDonald's, and he didn't know how to say no pickles. And he hates pickles with a passion. So every time he would go to McDonald's, he could do the number, right, of the order, but he couldn't say no pickles. So every time they gave him something with pickles, he would give it to somebody else and wouldn't eat that night.
Oh my God.
That doesn't happen anymore, right? That part, that difficulty with the language doesn't happen anymore. But the guys now have different challenges, right? We are, and I'm going to be very careful with what I say right now, we're in an era where racism is a little bit rampant. I'll just say it that way. So it is very difficult for them to be treated as equals, especially during spring training, even in Arizona, even in Florida, which are great places of great diversity. And a lot of Latin American people live there, but they are not treated equally, right? That is number one. And second, one of the things that Latino players constantly feel, especially if you're 16 years old and can't understand the language whatsoever, is that if you don't perform, you don't get to feed your family. You don't get to go home. It isn't about you don't get to win a gold glove and take a really nice picture. It isn't about, you don't get a World Series ring. It's about survival for a lot of these guys, right? The typical baller from the Dominican or from Venezuela, which are the two biggest, sources of talent,
Right.
international talent, all these guys, they'll be very happy with league minimum. So would we. So, they'll be very happy with that. And that's what they strive for. And it's too much pressure for them. So when you get that pressure, but in terms of education and language, it's gotten a lot better. I think the Players Association and Leonor Colon, who's the head of international relations, the VP, have done a great job. We know all the efforts that Carlos Beltran and all these other athletes, it wasn't only Carlos Beltran, people, a lot of athletes and the MLBPA did to have translators in the clubhouse. So it really has made a difference, but it's still a challenge. But the problem is that we are living in very difficult times, and a lot of these guys feel discriminated against, and that has become quite a problem for them.
Talk to me about translators and why they're so important. I mean, you hear stories about like Bartolo Colon, his whole career, he can speak English, maybe not perfectly, but he doesn't want to. He wants to use the translator for comfort. So can you just talk about that? Why
I think that things, it's wonderful. First of all, I can't tell you the times that I've been a translator when we didn't have any. I would actually stand and do, it's called, I apologize. Someone said before that I used the word scrum and I didn't explain what it was. I was like, I'm sorry. A scrum is that gaggle of people and reporters that get around players, hopefully in front of their locker, which isn't going to happen anymore, but it happened in front of their locker clubhouse. And we are not socially distant. We are very, very close to each other. And we ask questions. That's the scrum. So in terms of that aspect of it, of the scrum aspect, then it's enhanced that because now the player can speak exactly what they mean. English is still my second language. Now I am fully bilingual and I actually think in English when I speak in English. But if I have to curse, I curse in Spanish. If I need to make a supermarket list, I make it in Spanish because if I have to count, that is when you really know your bilingualism. I actually count in Spanish. If I have to count anything, do math. Not very good at it, but I do math numbers in Spanish. So just imagine that that's the way that you think. So then it's so much easier to just relay exactly what you say, in a way that cannot be misinterpreted. And in this era, where unfortunately it's about sensationalism in the media, and it's about reporters making themselves part of the story, then a misquoted player is gold, right? One of the things that happened at the Yankees many years ago with Michael Pineda is that he had said something about feeling intimidated to play in New York. And the word intimidado, which is the word intimidate, is entirely different. Even though it sounds like a cognate, which are words in English and Spanish that have
Right.
the same meaning, that have different meanings. So that's what I mean. It is so wonderful that these guys can speak just freely at this thing, but at the same time, it's necessary for telling their story. And that is what's cool. Now you've seen all these features and whatever, and it isn't only me and Jesse Sanchez and, like just a few of us, Alden Gonzalez and Pedro Gomez, who can speak to these guys. It is everybody now. And I love that. If you're interested in a player, if you're interested in the Yankees' #1 prospect, Davy Garcia, right? Their pitcher, their 20-year-old pitcher from the Dominican, you can speak to him. In the past, you were not able to. So that's pretty cool. In the minors, still a huge problem.
And I think it was Blake Griffin, he's doing stand-up comedy now, and he was saying one of his bits.
Fantastic.
Yeah, one of his bits is like, think about like you just played a game and then someone shoves a microphone in your face, and even if you speak English, then they're asking you these questions and trying to get you to fail. It's hard enough as it is, so then add in the barrier, and yeah, it's incredible.
Well, I am an educated person, right? Like I have a master's degree. I've spent all this time in baseball. I have a literature degree. Like I have this, right? I have screwed up on live television as a Spanish speaker because I've been translating in my head. Because if I get really nervous, I'll start thinking in Spanish and I start translating in my head. So just imagine me, an educated person who does this for a living. So then you're asking let's just use Michael Pineda as a reference at the time, a 22-year-old kid with a 7th grade education from the Dominican Republic to actually perfectly express what it is to pitch at Yankee Stadium. Come on. So if you're going to have the talent, if you're going to bring it, then you have to give him the tools to communicate. It can't just be, it can't be Marley Rivera in the clubhouse. It can't be Carlos Beltran. It can't be other athletes. It can't be Ricky Bones, who's the, assistant pitching coach for the Mets. Like it's a professional person who's in charge of doing that in the clubhouse. It's priceless. That's what I think.
What allows certain players, some of these younger Latin players or players from Japan, Korea, who come over, some of them, they're stars and then they fail, or some succeed. What do you think sets the ones that succeed apart in your experience?
Discipline. That has been my experience. Unless it's a major injury, which we cannot, foresee. So if you take injuries out of the question, right? So we're removing them. We remove injuries. It's about discipline. One of the things that happens, especially with athletes from foreign countries, is that all of a sudden you see yourself with all this money, right? And even the league minimum, and even one of those things
is a lot of money.
It's $500,000, which obviously, let me be very clear. Sometimes these players, because I'm tired of that saying that players are greedy, so I'm not doing that.
Right.
So let's be very clear. I know that it sounds like a huge bunch of money. If you're the only breadwinner in a family, if you do that entire thing after you finish a season, it's about $150K, what you have left. And you have to supply for all these families and all these people. So I think that's kind of how we have to see it. And you had to play that 162 season for that. So I just want to throw a bone. I'm pro player. Everyone knows that. So I want to throw them a bone out there about the. I told you, Jesse, don't get me going.
I love it. No, I love it.
It isn't. And I forgot the question. So
I was just saying what sets the ones that succeed apart, and you said discipline. I think you answered it.
So it is about that. It's about the fact that when you find that money for the first time, then you don't go spend it in booze and with your friends. Trust me, I'm all for you boozing up. I couldn't live without my bourbon. It's really who I am. But don't do it in a 162 game season, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of do it. It is so much harder, right, to be a Latin player in the United States in that sense, because you have to take care of so many people financially. Most of them come from very, very, very poor families, and they have to take care of people financially. But then if you are disciplined and if you follow the rules, and I'll leave you with this, I'm not going to leave you, but you know what I mean. I'll finish with this statement. Albert Pujols, in a spring training of about 6 or 7 years ago, I was in Arizona. No, he was already with the Angels. So whenever it was, his first year with the Angels. I was in Arizona, and I was in there next to his locker, and there was a young Hispanic player in there who's no longer in the league. So now we know which way he went. And he went inside, and he was playing on his phone and kind of chatting with the other guys. And his locker was next to Albert. So Albert walked in, and he said, "Are you done with your work? Did you finish working out? Did you talk to the manager? And he gave him a list of the things that he could have been doing instead of being chatting on his phone, planning what he was going to do tonight. Those are the players that succeed. The players listen, the players that have discipline, and I wouldn't have succeeded. I wouldn't have had, no, I wouldn't have, because you're required to be an adult at 22 years old to make all these wonderful decisions that are going to set you up for life with no education. So that is, the next step that I really needs to happen in every single league in the world. And now we are seeing a little bit with the mental aspect of the game. It's a financial aspect of the game. They need to teach these guys. They just really have no idea what they're doing. But the disciplined ones, Jesse, those are the ones that make it.
We had an audience question. Is it harder to make it as a Latin player?
Oh, look at that. I just said that.
Yeah.
No, because I'll give you an example. Jose Altuve, who is, it almost feels like the only Latin players that people talk about are superstars. You can't be like an average player and be a Latin player. Like, it really isn't. There's a few ones to get around, but it isn't. But because you have the language limitation, and because you have the contact limitation, and maybe you don't have the biggest agents in the game, I'm talking about the lower tier guys, right? I'm not talking about the superstars. That's different, right? Ronald Acuna has been scouted since he was 14. Everyone knows what he was going to do. He was going to get a big time agent on him. That's different. But the regular guy, right? The guy that makes $1 million a year or $2 million a year, that guy, absolutely harder, because you have all the other challenges on top of the ones that you have as a minor league player or roster invitee. You have the challenges of being Hispanic, of being discriminated against, of maybe not speaking the language, of not having connections, not knowing people. But some of them still do it, and it's very impressive to watch.
So you've helped raise money for Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. You've helped get the word out about the coalition Pedro Martinez and other Dominican players. I think it's like 40 of them at least are doing for COVID-19. Talk about the platform and how you use it to do good.
Well, you have to be careful, right? The problem is that you represent a company. So because I represent ESPN, I have to be very, very careful out there on social media. So for example, when I started collecting money for Puerto Rico, I needed to be very clear that that wasn't ESPN, because then otherwise the problem is that you're sort of using the name of the company that you work for, because, Marley Joe Schmo Rivera, people wouldn't have been paying attention, but Marley Rivera, who works for ESPN, they do.
It's different,
so balance that out and speak to your company and make sure that you're doing this on a personal level, like it can't be. And then surround yourself by people who are really, really smart, right? And then this is one of those parts where people freaking trusted me, because I asked people for money online. I said, please give me $5. If you have $5, we're going to make it to Puerto Rico. We got, I think in the end, it was $30,000. I could have pocketed that, but I pay a really high rent in New York City, and we're basically unemployed pretty soon. So I could have used that cushion of all that money, but I didn't, right? And it's exactly, and what I decided to do was put every bill and everything that we bought, we put it online. And this is what so I educated myself with the Carlos Beltran Foundation, who've done a lot of this. And then they told me, this is how you do it. And I also gave, I think it was 10,000, it wasn't my money, $10,000 of the donation, we gave it to an organization in Puerto Rico, a charity organization recognized and so on. So that's how we decided with that. With Pedro, it's the same thing, right? Like you have this very trustworthy people, and those are the ones that I like to promote. At ESPN, we are not allowed to promote because we have the Jimmy Fund. Right. So like ESPN contributes, we're really not allowed to promote a lot of charity, unfortunately. But like that's the way that I choose to do it. When an athlete that I really trust and I know the kind of work that they do, and that's Edwin Encarnacion and Jose Bautista and David Ortiz and of course Pedro Martinez, then of course I'm going to involve myself, and I don't care if I get like a little slap on the wrist because I was saying you should donate to this. It really is it's such a worthy cause, but it's about trust. I think that's the main thing. So
we're going to do rapid fire now. I'm going to say some things. You tell me the first thing that comes to your mind.
Oh, no.
What's your favorite?
Wait, I got to put my sensor on, Jesse, because that's so tailored.
It's 1 in the afternoon during coronavirus.
So well today.
No sensor.
Well. Drinking water, no bourbon.
What is your favorite snack food?
Oh, I love, and there is no reason why a 45-year-old woman should be eating this. I love hot Cheetos.
Awesome.
World, I love Cheetos.
Memory from a historic game you were a part of.
I was working or that I was there?
Either one.
I was there for the home run, the Aaron Boone home run game in the stands in left field. And I am a Yankee hater. I think a lot of people know that. I'm not a fan of any team, but I used to be a Yankee hater. So I booed very loudly and was very angry. So that's the memory. But working, now on a serious note, September 17th, the day that Maria hit, September 17th or 17th. This is amazing because, I had that date ingrained in my head. It's 17th or the 20th. On the day that Maria hit, I was doing Wednesday night baseball in Anaheim. And I was there with Sandy Alomar. It was actually the Indians against the Angels. And it was Sandy Alomar, Francisco Lindor, and Martin Maldonado. And when we all saw each other the next day and asked each other how our families were, and I didn't speak to my parents for 2 weeks. And none of us knew that I will always remember that moment of speaking to them about our island being destroyed by a hurricane.
That is powerful stuff. And sports always seems to transcend those moments. It's about the people, right? You can't leave your home without what other than your phone?
Oh my God. I'm not really like, actually I don't have it on right now, but I have certain jewelry that I wear. So I think mine is my ring. I have a ring that Eric gave me for my 40th birthday. And that's the ring. So I can't live without my ring. It bothers me. I'll be all day trying to look for my ring. Not wearing it now.
Favorite flavor of ice cream?
Oh, vanilla. I am the most boring, I think by my choice of mate. But it's like, I am so vanilla. It is so annoying. I'm not a sweets person. You wouldn't know because of my extra pounds. But I'm not a sweet person. I'm actually like a salty and spicy person. And I just eat vanilla ice cream. That's it.
Favorite Spanish phrase, and what does it mean in English?
Can't say it. It's a curse word.
Fair enough. That's a good enough answer, I think.
There is a thing that I say, and I will just text it to you, Jesse.
Fair
I'll tell
enough.
you.
Would you rather read people's minds or always get a completely honest answer whether you want it or not?
Can you repeat that? It got cut off a little bit.
Yeah. Would you rather always be able to read people's minds or get an honest answer to everything whether you want it or not?
Read people's minds. I already get honest answers to everything. I don't have to worry about honesty unless I'm talking to some OB officials.
All right, we're gonna do baseball cards now. I'm gonna show you, and you just tell me about Orlando Cepeda. First thing that comes to mind.
Look who's there, baby Bull. That's my guy. Couldn't love him more. We spent his 75th birthday together. Some of my most cherished moments, and he is a giant and will always be. And we are very happy that he's healthier after having such a difficult health crisis the last couple of years and losing his wife. So, God, one of the kindest people I've ever met in the game.
Alex Rodriguez.
My colleague at ESPN.
Yes. Salvador Perez.
Oh my God, Salvi! Salvi and Giordano Ventura in 2013, 14, and 15 were some of my favorite people to talk to. And the best part about Salvi is that he always has a smile on his face no matter what. He tore his knees when we were in the WBC. He couldn't play for an entire year, and he was there with a smile supporting his teammates. Never seen that.
Omar Vizquel.
Should be in the Hall of Fame. That's all I have to say.
That's a good one. And then Albert Pujols. You mentioned him before.
Pujols 5. Probably one of the most, and I'm not saying underrated in terms of as a player. He's been very well rated as a player. Probably one of the most underrated as a person and the impact that he has had on Latin American players. There's no one in the game, no one that I've ever seen outside of Albert Pujols that has more of an impact. Albert Pujols and Carlos Beltran that have had more of an impact on young Hispanic players than Albert Pujols.
So you did very well on the little rapid fire parts of this. We've got about 9 minutes left before Instagram cuts us off. So, yes, it flies by, right? What has your coronavirus experience been like from a work perspective?
It's sad, right? Like every time we have the luxury of having a balcony in New York City. And when I go outside and I see my city so quiet, it breaks my heart every day, but it's easy to make phone calls. So you can make a lot of phone calls now. And it's been a lesson in who your friends are and who people are. And there's been these athletes that I've had close relationships with who haven't returned my calls. So when you find yourself, it's just been a lesson in experience and learning who the good people are. Because I don't have a problem if you don't want to talk, but I have a problem if you don't reply and you ignore my reaching out, because you know exactly why I'm reaching out, because I'm not going to speak about the ballpark. So I don't have a problem if you tell me, sorry, Marley, I really have nothing to say. No problem. We move on. But such a lesson in who people are. That's what coronavirus reveals. It's like wealth. It reveals who
people's true self. Yes. Okay. When I had Eric on, I asked everybody, what's the best thing that's happened to him because of coronavirus? And he said, spending time with you, but you probably have a different answer. I said I would ask you, Marley, what has been the best part of this pandemic for you?
It is true. Eric and I, we were doing calculations. Eric and I have been together for 8 years, and we never spent more than 2 weeks anywhere together. And most of those were on vacation. So they used to, when I was a national writer, I'm back on the Yankees beat, but when I was a national writer the last 3 or 4 years, we only saw each other about twice a month. So that certainly has been very good. But I would say that the number one thing is to talk to people that you never did before. And those phone calls that you kept putting off and like, oh, I'm going to make that phone call someday. Eric's best friend, I hadn't met him. Like all these years we've been together, I hadn't met him, and we just did a Zoom call with him and had a happy. So I feel like that's what matters. All these people that you keep saying, oh yeah, I'll call you. You never do. You actually have no excuse now.
And then he said you've been baking a lot. So what's the best thing? The key lime pie was what he said.
I was so fit, and now it's like all these pounds are coming back. The Corona 30.
What has been your favorite thing you've made?
Key lime pie.
Yeah.
It was. I made carrot. I made carrot ginger soup today. It's very good. But my best ones have been a key lime pie, and I made a homemade pizza, and I had never done that. So I did except the cheese. I made everything else. So it's very cool. So those are. But I think the key lime pie has been the best.
All right. So I'm going to ask you my last question, and then we'll get maybe another audience question in. What does baseball mean to you?
That's hard. It means my dad and my family. Like when I think of baseball, I think about being a little kid watching baseball with my dad and going to ballparks and doing that kind of thing. I feel like that's what it means to me. It means family. It means like these people who have been my family my entire life. And it's funny how it translates now, right? Because baseball, we really are a big family. We don't know anyone else because this is what we do. So, and when I was saying, we always have an excuse of why we don't call people. We always have an excuse because we have all these games and all this life. And it's really because we're a family. Like I see Christy Ackard, much more often than I see any one of my friends whatsoever. So then these people become your family. So for me, baseball is family.
We have an audience question here, and it says...
There's someone listening. I'm sorry.
Marley, you've never... You don't have to apologize. I think they're enjoying themselves. They're still here. You've never held anything back when asking questions, and that is it says that's a fantastic trait. What drives you to press for the truth? Is it an attitude or a quest for people to take accountability?
It's my I don't care attitude. I'm not kidding. I wish that I could tell you that it was like a really much more broad thing and much more well thought out, like the question you just asked. Like, is it about accountability? No. For me, it's I don't care. I need to ask you this, and I don't care how you're going to feel about it. I'm going to ask it very politely. I'd never ask it just, I'll wrap it up and be like, but I really, really don't care. I got this lesson early on in 2011 when I was on the Yankees beat that a certain player stopped. One of the things that happened to me, because in the beginning, when I was on the Yankees beat, I was the only one I wrote in Spanish a lot for ESPN.com, Deportes in Spanish, and which meant that every one of the players' families read me. So everyone read everybody else, right? The players, but their families read me. And I made a negative comment about a player who was pitching that day. And I said that he was throwing BP in the first inning. That was part of my lead. And he gave up 7 home runs in 1 inning, or it was 5 home runs, I think it was. I'm exaggerating. And the player stopped talking to me. And he was a star player when I asked him, because he said, you know what? You didn't have to be so sarcastic and write it that way. I'm very offended about the way you did. And I was really upset because he was a star player that I needed to speak with on a regular basis. And I went up to George King and I said, hey, George, this player, this happened. And he looked at me and he said, about freaking time you started doing your job. So that's it. It's about, you have to do your job. That's the reason why I ask it. It isn't about putting myself. It isn't about getting the soundbite. Jim Crane is one of the kindest people I have ever met. He donated more for Puerto Rico than I've ever seen. It's incredible what he does. And I asked him one of the toughest questions because it needed to be asked. It isn't about, when that became viral, I hated every minute of it because I didn't make it about, let's see Marley do a gotcha thing to Jim Crane. I actually wrote to the Astros and asked them if I needed to apologize to Jim Crane. And they're like, no, Marley, you're just doing your job. So do your job. Your job is to ask questions. Just ask them.
That's awesome. All right, last question here. We'll combine two. We have about 2 minutes. So based on a shortened season, who has an advantage? What team? And do you think we'll have baseball this year?
Middle pack teams will have an advantage in a weird way. One of the things that we see very often is that it takes about 2 months for teams to kind of gear up. And then what happens is that those middle of the road teams are going to have a chance. I'm not saying that the Blue Jays are going to go into division, but they have a chance to compete now. So I think we're going to see that in every single division, and it makes me really happy. You know, all of a sudden the NL East, which was, I mean, talk about a monster of a division, all of a sudden the Marlins are in play.
Right.
So I feel like those teams with talent, they can build themselves up with, you know, some backup. So I think that the middle of the road teams are really going to be the ones that benefit the most, besides the Houston Astros. And in terms of the season, this week you caught me on a bad week. So last week I thought that we were going to have one. This week I've been very sad about it. And I feel, and maybe it comes from living in New York City. We don't go through phase one until we started on June 8th. And I saw the proposal from the Players Association, and they are talking about baseball on June 30th. And maybe we are just too close to the eye of the storm to be able to see baseball. But God, do I hope so. That's I don't even pray, and I started praying. So we have some really don't.
So this has been, you decide, Marley and me or Marley and Marley? You said both.
I think it has to be Marley and Marley. She leaves no room for anyone else to talk.
I love that.
I
love that.
Yeah, Marley. Marley and herself and going off on random tangents.
So Marley Rivera, Marley and Marley, thank you so much for doing this. We really, really appreciate it. You're wonderful. And we will see everybody on Thursday. Thanks so much, Marley.
Bessie, I'm sorry if I,
No, you're amazing. And Eric, thank you for heckling.
So much. Thank you for
All right, bye, everyone.